The hiking group's website had a motto: leave nothing but footprints, take nothing but memories. After my third hike with them, I realized our trail leader had a different motto, one she didn't post online. I was about to become one of the memories she took, and I got the feeling she didn't leave her memories behind in the wilderness, she buried them there. It all started innocently enough. I'd just moved to a small town nestled in the shadow of a sprawling national forest, the kind of place where everyone's lived for generations and a new face stands out like a sore thumb. I'm Matthew, by the way, just a regular guy in his late 20s who'd taken a remote job that let me live anywhere. I chose this place for the quiet, the fresh air, the promise of a life less beige. But after 2 months, the only meaningful conversations I'd had were with the cashier at the grocery store and a particularly friendly golden retriever. Loneliness is a funny thing. It creeps up on you until it's a physical weight on your chest. I needed to meet people. That's when I found the Ridge Runners Hiking Club. Their website was full of smiling, sun-drenched photos of people who looked like they'd just stepped out of an REI catalog. They looked happy, connected. Their weekly hikes seemed like the perfect antidote to my social isolation. It felt safe, organized. There was even a section about the group's founder and lead guide, a woman named Arver. The bio painted her as a local legend, a certified wilderness first responder, an expert in local flora and fauna, a passionate conservationist. Her picture showed a woman in her mid-30s with a warm, confident smile, her eyes crinkling at the corners. She looked like exactly the kind of person you'd trust with your life. My first hike was a gentle 5-miler, a loop around a picturesque lake. Arver was even more impressive in person. She was incredibly fit, with the kind of lean, wiry strength that comes from constantly being in motion. She greeted me with that same magnetic smile from the website, a firm handshake, and an easy charm that instantly put me at ease. She seemed to know everything about the trail, pointing out rare birds and explaining the medicinal properties of different plants. The rest of the group, a mix of regulars in their 30s and 40s, clearly adored her. They hung on her every word, laughing at her jokes and soaking in her expertise. I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I'd found my people. It was on the second hike that the first little red flag, a tiny, almost unnoticeable little flutter, appeared. It was a slightly more strenuous trek, and out and back to a waterfall. Before we set off, Arva gave her usual pre-hike briefing. "Okay, Ridge Runners," she said, her voice bright and authoritative. "Standard rules apply. Stay behind me, maintain a steady pace, and no headphones. I need you all to be present and aware of your surroundings. Standard stuff." But then she added something new. "And please, make sure your phones are in airplane mode. Not just on silent, but airplane mode. We're here to disconnect from that world and connect with this one." She smiled as she said it, but there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, an intensity that seemed out of place. One of the other new members, a guy named Chris, chuckled and said, "Good luck getting a signal out here anyway." Arver's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "It's not about the signal, Chris," she said, her tone still light, but with an underlying edge of steel. "It's about discipline, and about ensuring there are no distractions that could lead to a mistake. My first priority is everyone's safety, and that requires your full compliance." The way she said compliance sent a weird little shiver down my spine. It was a strange choice of words for a weekend hiking club. Chris just shrugged and put his phone on airplane mode. I did the same, chalking it up to her being a serious outdoorswoman who took safety seriously. A little intense, maybe, but that was probably a good thing in a trail leader. Later on that hike, another small thing happened. My water bottle slipped from the side pocket of my backpack and clattered onto the rocky path. Before I could even bend down to get it, Arver, who was a few feet ahead, spun around with surprising speed. "Matthew, secure your gear," she snapped. The friendly guide was gone, replaced by a stern drill sergeant. The entire group stopped and looked back. My face flushed with embarrassment. "Sorry," I mumbled, grabbing the bottle. Her expression softened just as quickly as it had hardened. "No worries," she said, her warm smile returning. "Just a reminder that a loose item can become a lost item, and a lost item in the wrong situation can be a disaster. We're only as strong as our most prepared member." She called it a teaching moment, but it felt more like a reprimand, a subtle way of establishing dominance. By the third hike, a pattern was emerging. Arver had a whole litany of oddly specific rules. We had to pack our bags in a certain way, she demonstrated, with weight distributed just so. We had to use the specific type of water filter she recommended, not just any filter. She insisted on buddy checks every 30 minutes, where we had to physically tap our assigned partner and confirm we were okay, even if we were walking right next to them. Anyone who questioned or deviated from these rules, even in a minor way, would receive a sharp public correction disguised as a friendly safety tip. It was all very controlling. The other regulars seemed completely unfazed by it. They followed her instructions with an almost cult-like devotion. They called it Arver's way. To them, it was proof of her expertise. To me, it was starting to feel like a series of strange, arbitrary loyalty tests. The unease was a low hum beneath the surface of the beautiful scenery, a gut feeling that something was off about this perfect, charismatic leader. I told myself I was overthinking it. She was just thorough. She was just keeping us safe. But as we prepared for our fourth hike, a challenging 14-mile trek through a remote section of the forest with no cell service, I couldn't shake the feeling that her tests were about to get a lot harder. The morning of the fourth hike was different. There was a charge in the air, a nervous energy that hadn't been there on the previous trips. The route was called Devil's Backbone, a name that should have been my first clue to just stay home. It was known for its steep inclines, unmarked forks, and notoriously unreliable trail markers. On the website, it was listed as an expert-level hike, open only to members who had completed at least 3 prior hikes and received Arver's personal approval. When she had pulled me aside the week before, her eyes gleaming, and told me I was ready, I'd felt a surge of pride. Now, standing at the trailhead under a sky the color of slate, that pride had curdled into a knot of anxiety in my stomach. There were only 4 of us this time, a significant drop from the usual dozen or so. There was Arver, of course, looking as serene and capable as ever. Then there was me, and 2 of her most devoted followers, a quiet, intense couple named Mark and Sarah. They moved with a practiced efficiency, their gear perfectly packed, their expressions unreadable. They'd been hiking with Arver for years, and they mirrored her movements, her language, even the cadence of her speech. They felt less like fellow hikers and more like her lieutenants. "All right, team," Arver began, her voice cutting through the chilly morning air. "This is the big one. No turning back once we're on the ridge." She held up a map, but it wasn't a standard Park Service map. It looked like a hand-drawn, laminated chart, full of her own notes and symbols. "We're going off the grid today. The official trail is for tourists. We're taking a more scenic route. That means no phones, not even for photos. I want your eyes on the trail, not on a screen. Understood. We all nodded. Mark and Sarah looked thrilled. I just felt my stomach clench a little tighter. The no phones rule had always been there, but this time the emphasis felt more absolute, more isolating. The first few miles were brutal, a relentless upward climb that left my legs burning and my lungs screaming. Arver set a punishing pace, moving over the treacherous terrain with the grace of a mountain goat. Mark and Sarah kept up easily, their breathing even, their movements economical. I was struggling, lagging a few yards behind, my city lungs protesting the thin mountain air. Every time I'd pause to catch my breath, I'd feel Arver's eyes on me. She wouldn't say anything, but I could feel her judgment, her disappointment. It was another test. The physical test. Could I keep up? Around lunchtime, we reached a fork in the trail. To the left was a path that looked vaguely maintained, marked with a faded blue blaze on a tree. To the right was a barely there trail, a thin ribbon of dirt disappearing into a thicket of overgrown rhododendron. Arver, without hesitation, turned right. I paused, looking at the blue blaze. Shouldn't we? I started to ask. That's the Park Service trail, Arver said, cutting me off. She gestured dismissively at the marked path. It's compromised, full of day trippers and people who don't respect the wilderness. My trail is more direct, cleaner. Mark and Sarah nodded in agreement, their faces impassive. The word cleaner hung in the air, feeling loaded and strange. We were miles from anyone, so who were these day trippers she was so worried about? We followed her into the dense undergrowth. The canopy of leaves closed in above us, plunging the world into a gloomy green twilight. The air grew still and heavy. The sounds of the forest, the birds and insects, seemed to fade away, replaced by an unnerving silence. An hour later, I realized I hadn't seen a single trail marker since we left the main path. The trail itself was barely visible, and we were often just bushwhacking through dense foliage. My unease was now a full-blown alarm bell clanging in my head. This wasn't hiking, this was getting lost on purpose. Arver, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm a bit turned around. Are you sure this is the right way? She stopped and turned to face me, her expression unreadable. For the first time, her smile didn't reach her eyes. Worried, Matthew? She asked, her voice soft and low. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. No, no, of course not, I stammered, trying to backtrack. Just curious. I like to keep my bearings, you know. Your bearings are with me, she stated simply. I am the map. I am the compass. All you need to do is follow. Mark and Sarah understand that. Don't you? She glanced at them, and they both gave a short, sharp nod, like soldiers affirming an order. The dynamic was chillingly clear. She was the leader, and they were her flock. I was the outsider, the one who asked questions, the one who wasn't fully compliant. The real turning point came about an hour after that. We were navigating a particularly steep and slippery section of the trail, scrambling over moss-covered rocks. I was trying to find a stable handhold when my foot slipped. I tumbled backward, landing hard on my side. My backpack, the one Arver had insisted I pack so meticulously, cushioned the fall, but my water bottle, which I'd stupidly put back in the flimsy side pocket, wasn't so lucky. It flew out and went skittering down the ravine, disappearing into the dense ferns below. Damn it, I muttered, scrambling to my feet. I'll just go grab it. No, Arver's voice was flat and cold. Leave it. I stared at her, bewildered. But it's my only one. I have a filter, but I need the bottle." "You lost it. That's your mistake," she said, her eyes like chips of ice. "In the wild, a mistake has consequences. This is a teaching moment. You'll learn to be more careful with your gear next time." Mark and Sarah just stood there, watching, their faces blank. They made no move to help, no offer to share their water. It felt like a scripted scene, a pre-planned lesson in cruelty. The horrifying realization crashed down on me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't about safety. It wasn't about discipline. It was a game, and she was making up the rules as she went. The prize for winning was survival, and I was starting to understand that she had no intention of letting me win. My water bottle was gone. We were miles off any official trail, and the 3 people I was with were not my friends. They were my captors. The sun began its slow descent, painting the undersides of the clouds in shades of orange and bruised purple. The beauty of the sunset was completely lost on me. All I felt was a primal, gut-wrenching fear. The temperature was dropping, and a cold sweat trickled down my back, a stark contrast to the burning thirst in my throat. Every swallow felt like sandpaper. My mind was racing, replaying every interaction with Arver, every weird rule, every condescending teaching moment. The red flags I had ignored were now waving furiously in my face, spelling out a single, terrifying word: trap. Arver seemed to sense the shift in me. The charismatic hiking guide persona was completely gone, replaced by something cold and predatory. She walked ahead, her pace unwavering, but she kept glancing back at me, a faint, cruel smirk playing on her lips. She knew I was scared. She was feeding on it. Mark and Sarah flanked me, one slightly ahead and one slightly behind, boxing me in. Their silence was more unnerving than any threat. They were her extensions, her loyal hounds, ensuring the sheep didn't stray from the path to the slaughter. "Feeling the burn, Matthew?" Arver called out, her voice laced with mock concern. "Dehydration can set in quickly. Makes you confused. Makes you weak." It wasn't an observation, it was a promise. She was narrating my decline, savoring it. I had to play along. My only chance was to pretend I was still the naive new guy, just a bit overwhelmed. Panicking would get me killed. Showing defiance would get me killed. I had to make her think I was still under her spell, that I was learning her twisted lesson. "Yeah, a bit," I managed to croak out, forcing a weak smile. "You were right. I should have secured my bottle. Lesson learned." Her smirk widened. "Good. Learning is what this is all about." We walked on for what felt like an eternity. My world had shrunk to the burning in my legs, the pounding in my head, and the dry, sticky feeling in my mouth. My thoughts grew fuzzy. I started to stumble more frequently, my coordination failing. Each time I did, Mark or Sarah would be there to steady me, their hands gripping my arm with surprising strength, their touch feeling less like assistance and more like a warning. They weren't helping me up, they were reminding me that I was their prisoner. We finally stopped in a small, cramped clearing as dusk settled into darkness. It was a terrible place to make camp, on a slope, with damp ground and no natural shelter. It felt deliberate, another way to keep me off balance and miserable. "We'll rest here for a few hours," Arver announced, dropping her pack. She didn't even look tired. She looked energized, her eyes gleaming in the fading light. Mark and Sarah moved with silent, rehearsed precision, pulling out sleeping pads and a small, shared tarp. They didn't offer me anything. I sank to the ground, my body screaming in protest. Thirst was a physical pain now, a constant, agonizing ache. I watched as Arver pulled out her own water bottle and took a long, slow drink, her eyes locked on mine the entire time. It was the most sadistic thing I had ever witnessed. She was torturing me, and she was enjoying it. My mind was a chaotic swirl of fear and desperation. I had to get away. But how? They were watching my every move. I was exhausted, dehydrated, and disoriented. Running blindly into the woods at night was a death sentence. I needed a plan. I needed to think. I closed my eyes, feigning exhaustion, and tried to control my ragged breathing. I had to outlast them, or at least outthink Arver. What did I have? I did a mental inventory. In my pockets, I had a small pocket knife, a lighter, and my phone, which was still on airplane mode. The phone was useless for calls, but it had a flashlight and a compass, and maybe, just maybe, a downloaded map. My heart hammered against my ribs. I hadn't specifically downloaded a map of this area, but my phone's GPS app sometimes cached maps of places I'd been near. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot I had. The problem was getting to it. If Arver saw me with my phone, it would be over. The rule she had been so fanatical about, the no phones rule, suddenly made perfect, horrifying sense. It wasn't about disconnecting from the world, it was about disconnecting her victims from any hope of rescue. I lay on the cold, damp ground, pretending to sleep. I listened to the low murmur of conversation between Arver, Mark, and Sarah. They were talking about past hikes, about other members. They mentioned a name, a guy named Ben, who had been on a few hikes last summer and then just stopped coming. He wasn't cut out for it, Arver said with a chilling finality. He didn't learn the lesson. My blood ran cold. How many others had there been? How many memories had she collected? Hours crawled by. The temperature plummeted. I was shivering uncontrollably, my teeth chattering. My body was giving up. I knew if I stayed here until morning, I wouldn't have the strength to escape. It had to be now. Arver and her disciples had settled down under their tarp, their breathing evening out into the rhythm of sleep. This was it. My one chance. Slowly, agonizingly, I pushed myself up. My muscles screamed in protest. Every movement was a monumental effort. I waited, listening, my heart in my throat. No one stirred. With trembling fingers, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I shielded the screen with my body, praying the dim light wouldn't give me away, and pressed the power button. The screen flared to life, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. I navigated to the map app, my thumb fumbling on the screen. A little blue dot appeared, showing my location. And then I saw it. Cached, faint, but there. A thin, blue line. A river. It was about 2 miles south of our position. Rivers often have roads or trails alongside them. It was a direction. It was a chance. I was at my lowest point, a broken, thirsty animal lying on the forest floor, but for the first time in hours I had a flicker of hope. Now I just had to get there. My body was a traitor. It screamed at me to stay put, to conserve what little energy I had left. But my will, fueled by pure, unadulterated terror, forced me to my feet. I moved one slow, deliberate step at a time, trying to make my movements as silent as a whisper of wind through the pines. The sound of my own breathing was a roar in my ears. Each snapped twig under my boot sounded like a gunshot. I kept my eyes locked on the 3 shapes huddled under the tarp, expecting them to spring up at any second. But their breathing remained steady. They were asleep. Once I was clear of the campsite, I started to move faster. I couldn't risk using the phone's flashlight, so I was running blind, stumbling through the pitch-black undergrowth. Branches whipped at my face, and thorns tore at my clothes and skin. I fell, picked myself up, and kept going, driven by the image of Arver's cold, smiling eyes. I had to put as much distance between us as possible before they woke up. My only guide was the compass on my phone, which I risked glancing at every few minutes, shielding its faint glow with my cupped hands. South. I just had to keep moving south. The thirst was an all-consuming fire now. My tongue was thick and swollen, and my head throbbed with a dizzying, relentless rhythm. I started to hallucinate, seeing fleeting shapes in the shadows, hearing whispers that sounded like Arver's voice carried on the wind. Panic was a clawing beast at the edge of my consciousness, and I had to fight to keep it at bay. I focused on the singular goal: the river, water, safety. After what felt like a lifetime of stumbling through the darkness, I heard it. A faint, trickling sound. It grew louder, becoming a steady murmur, the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I broke through a final line of trees, and there it was, shimmering in the faint moonlight. The river. I practically fell into the water, ignoring the shocking cold. I cupped my hands and drank again and again. The water was icy and clean, and it felt like life itself pouring down my throat. I didn't care about filters or bacteria. At that moment, I would have drunk from a puddle. I knew I couldn't stay. As soon as Arver woke and found me gone, they would be hunting me. And they knew this forest. I was just an intruder. I looked for a road, a path, anything. And then I saw it on the opposite bank, a dirt track, barely visible, running parallel to the water. It was probably an old logging road. It wasn't a highway, but it was a sign of civilization. It was a way out. I waded across the river, the current pulling at my exhausted legs, and scrambled up the other side. I started to jog, my wet clothes clinging to me, my body screaming with every step. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every gust of wind sounded like my name being called. I don't know how long I ran. An hour, two, but then I saw it. A light. A single, beautiful, yellow light in the distance. It was a porch light. A house. Tears streamed down my face, mixing with the sweat and grime. I stumbled towards it, a new wave of adrenaline surging through me. I hammered on the door, my voice a ragged croak. Help! Please, help me! An old man with a kind, weathered face opened the door, his eyes wide with alarm. He took one look at my torn clothes, my scratched face, and my state of utter collapse, and immediately pulled me inside. He sat me down, wrapped me in a blanket, and his wife gave me a glass of water and called 911. While we waited for the sheriff, I told them everything, the words tumbling out of me in a frantic, disjointed stream. The hiking group, the weird rules, the fake trail, the water bottle, the escape. They listened with growing horror, shaking their heads in disbelief. When the sheriff's deputies arrived, I told them the story again. They were skeptical at first. A hiking trip gone wrong. A controlling leader. It sounded flimsy. But then they saw the raw terror in my eyes, the deep scratches on my arms and face, my advanced state of dehydration and exhaustion. They took my statement seriously. I gave them Arver's full name and the name of the hiking group. I told them where the trailhead was, and I did my best to describe the area where I had last seen her. I spent the rest of the night in a local clinic, being treated for dehydration and exposure. The next day, one of the deputies came to see me. They had gone to the trailhead. Arver's car was still there. They had sent a search and rescue team into the area I described. They hadn't found anyone. No camp, no tarp, no sign of Arver, Mark, or Sarah. It was like they had vanished into thin air. They found my discarded water bottle in the ravine, exactly where I said it would be. That, at least, lent some credibility to my story. The investigation is still open, but it's mostly gone cold. The Ridge Runners website was taken down within 24 hours of me going to the police. There's no trace of it, no cache, nothing. Arver, Mark, and Sarah, if those were even their real names, seem to have never existed. There are no public records that match the descriptions I gave. The police think they were likely using aliases, preying on newcomers, and then disappearing. They asked me about Ben, the hiker I'd overheard them talking about. They're looking into missing person cases from the previous summer, trying to see if there's a connection. So far, nothing concrete. I moved away from that town. I couldn't stay. I can't even look at a forest now without feeling a cold knot of fear in my stomach. Sometimes, late at night, I lie awake and think about Arver. I think about her smile, the one that didn't reach her eyes. I think about her teaching moments and her collection of memories. Was I just another test, one that she failed? Or was I the one who was supposed to be a lesson, the one who wasn't cut out for it? I don't know what her ultimate plan was. But I know one thing for sure. I got away. I left nothing but footprints, and I took with me a memory so terrifying, it will haunt me for the rest of my life. And I can't help but wonder, how many other memories did she leave buried out there on the Devil's Backbone? Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and give this video a like. We appreciate everyone and can't wait to bring more stories your way.